You ever sit across from someone who thinks you don't belong at your own table? That was my father-in-law, Richard Talbot. The kind of man who shakes hands like he's squeezing a trigger. The kind who says, just joking, after every insult, but always means every damn word. He was standing at the head of the table, dressed like he was late for a yacht he didn't own, listing off vacation assignments for the family cabin. Every year, we rotated time slots for the lakeside house in Vermont, something his grandfather bought with railroad money and a good amount of silence, if the family whispers were true. Emily and Chris get the fourth, Richard barked, scanning the paper like it was a company roster, not a family tradition. Kelly, you and the girls have Labor Day. And Allison, he turned to my wife, you and your mother get Memorial. I waited. And us? I asked, eyes flicking from him to Allison. Richard didn't even look at me. You can have October, if it's still standing after the summer. I kept my voice level. What about James? That's my son. He's 9. My son from my first marriage. And he was sitting right there, quietly eating the ham roll-ups his step-grandmother served with the elegance of a woman who wished we'd all leave and never come back. Richard gave a small laugh. Not the kind that invites you in. The kind that lets you know you're being dismissed. He's not really family. I heard the words. Every one of them. Like nails dragged slow across a chalkboard I didn't know I'd left my heart on. But it was Allison's silence that did it. She didn't flinch. Didn't say a word. Just stared down at her glass like there was something interesting floating in her Chardonnay. And in that moment, my jaw locked, my spine straightened, and something inside me folded in half and burned. That's when James did something I hadn't planned. Something I'll never forget. He reached into his little backpack, pulled out a folded manila envelope, and calmly slid it across the table toward Richard. "Grandpa," he said, in the clear, small voice of a boy who's seen more than he should, "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever hurt me again." The room stopped. Like God hit the mute button. Richard raised an eyebrow, then scoffed. "Hurt you? I gave you a Nerf football last Christmas, kid." James didn't blink. "You called me a stray last Easter," he said. "And you told me I didn't belong in the family photo." Mom cried. "You said I was just being sensitive." Allison's wine glass shook slightly in her hand. Richard picked up the envelope with the smug nonchalance of a man who thought he still controlled the moment. Then he opened it. And he screamed. It was a scream that didn't belong to a man like him. Not the kind of scream you hear in a courtroom or a hospital. This was different. This was loss. This was power slipping through fingers too arrogant to hold it. Everyone stared at him, confused, wide-eyed. He dropped the paper like it burned. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, his voice cracking at the edge. It was a copy of his trust portfolio. More specifically, the legal documents proving his financial exposure in the cabin, how he'd illegally funneled funds from the family estate to keep it afloat during a bad real estate deal in 2015. A deal I found in the public records after months of subtle digging. James looked at him, calm as a priest at a funeral. "Dad says if you ever insult me again in front of him, or hurt Mom with your words, we're sending copies to your lawyer and the IRS." I couldn't have been prouder of my boy. You see, I wasn't just a delivery guy who married into old money. I used to work for a title firm. I know how to look into things. Paper trails. Shell companies. Quiet embezzlement posing as tradition. And I also know how to teach a 9-year-old how to fold paper and look a man in the eye. Allison still hadn't said a word. Not then. Not even after James slid back into his seat and resumed eating like it was just another Tuesday. But I caught her eye. And for the first time in a long time, she looked scared. She should be. Because that was just the beginning. After Richard screamed, the room didn't just fall silent, it curdled. Like milk left in the sun too long. Everyone sat frozen. Forks midair. Allison's stepmother was still holding a deviled egg like it had turned into a live grenade. I didn't move. I just watched him. Richard scrambled to pick up the papers, flipping through them like he could make the numbers lie if he looked fast enough. The blood drained from his face as he reached the last page, the page that listed my name, quietly attached to a holding company tied to the land title of the cabin. The deed transfer wasn't official yet, but the intent was legally documented. A whisper of wind in the form of a future he hadn't seen coming. "I don't know where you got this," he finally spat, "but it's bull. That land has been in my family for 3 generations. Actually," I said, my voice calm like a man reading instructions aloud, "it was seized in foreclosure in 2015. Bought by a holding firm under a name very similar to your daughter's, just with 1 letter swapped. I only noticed because the county clerk misspelled it in the online filing. Twice." I didn't look at Allison, but I felt her stiffen. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a variable. one she never factored into the family math. This is extortion, Richard said, slamming the folder shut. No, I said, sliding my chair back. This is leverage. You see, Richard, I don't give a damn about your cabin. I don't want the lake house, or the money, or your fake Christmas traditions. He opened his mouth to fire back, but I cut him off with a look. What I do want, I said slowly, is for you to stop humiliating my son in front of this family. I want you to remember that you're a grandfather, not a gatekeeper. I looked at Allison, and I want my wife to decide what side of the table she's sitting on. James sat still, watching everything, soaking it in. His small hand clenched under the table, like he wasn't sure whether to be proud or scared. Later that night, after the dishes were done and Richard locked himself in his study pretending to take calls, Allison and I drove home in silence. The kind of silence that stings more than yelling ever could. James was in the back seat, headphones in, watching cartoons, blissfully unaware of the way his mother's fingernails were digging into her thighs like she was trying to tear the guilt out of herself. Finally, just past the gas station near our subdivision, she said, "You shouldn't have done that." I kept my eyes on the road. Which part? The document. The threat. That wasn't fair. I let out a breath. A long one. You know what's not fair? I said that our son knew he needed protection from your father. That he thought I might not be there the next time it happened. So yeah, I gave him the envelope. I told him, only use it if he tries to make you feel small again. And you know what? He knew it was time. I didn't think he meant it, she said quietly. I didn't think he'd do it. I turned to her for the first time. Didn't think he would, or didn't think you'd have to see it? She looked away. That was the moment I realized something ugly and final. Allison didn't cheat on me with another man. No, her betrayal was quieter. She cheated on us, me and James, with comfort, with complicity. Her silence wasn't an accident. It was her loyalty to power, not to family. We got home. James went upstairs, humming, and I sat on the couch alone, staring at the wall. The envelope was only the beginning, because what Richard didn't know, and what Allison never thought to ask, was that I had 4 more folders. One for each secret this family has buried under lakeside traditions and Chardonnay smiles. And I was done playing the polite son-in-law. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee, but not the good kind. Not the French roast I keep in the back of the pantry for weekends. This was the cheap blend Richard liked. Bitter. Burnt. Allison was in the kitchen, hair pinned up, already dressed like she had somewhere to be but didn't want to say where. She looked at me like nothing happened. "Morning," she said, setting 2 mugs on the counter. "Is it?" I asked. She didn't answer. We stood in that kitchen like 2 actors refusing to break character. Her mug trembled slightly in her hands. Mine didn't. I sat down, took a sip, watched her from across the island. "You sleep okay?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Did you?" A pause. "I kept dreaming about James," she admitted, her voice thin. "He looked different. Older. Cold." I nodded slowly. "He's learning." She flinched. "You know what he asked me last night before bed?" I continued. "He asked if real family means people who don't make you feel like trash when you're in the room." Her mouth opened, then closed. No words. Just that same silent guilt that smelled like perfume and cowardice. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out another folder. Read this time. She blinked. "What's that?" "This," I said, "is the original trust agreement on the cabin." "And this?" I opened it. "Is the amendment filed 2 years ago when your father moved funds out of the family's health trust to cover renovations." She went pale. "He used the money earmarked for your mother's long-term care. Then he funneled it through 2 shell companies, one of which your cousin Josh signed for. You remember Josh, don't you? The one who couldn't hold down a job but suddenly bought a boat." "That's not," he told us, she stammered. "Yeah," I said flatly. "He told you." Her hands were shaking now, and I saw it, the first real crack in the mask. I stood up, walked around the island, set the folder gently in front of her. "You married me because I made you feel grounded," I said. "Because I saw you. Not your name, not your family tree, not your father's shadow. Just you. And for a while, you were proud of that." She looked up at me, eyes glossy. "I still am." "No," I said. "You're not. You're afraid of what it means now. Because you saw how fast I could pull back the curtain. Because I didn't ask permission. Because I didn't need your father's name to make you mine." Silence. I turned toward the stairs. James was up. I could hear him brushing his teeth, humming something from that show he loved. And that sound, that was the only thing keeping the temperature in my chest from boiling over. "I'm not going to war with your father," Allison, I said without turning back. I'm building an exit. From him, she asked. I paused. From all of you. I left her standing there, hand trembling over a coffee mug and a document she never thought she'd see. That day, I took James to school, held his hand longer than usual at drop-off. And on the way back home, I made a stop. Law office. Downtown. White brick building with ivy and old oak doors. I walked in, sat down across from a lawyer I'd met once during a case involving a contractor dispute. A sharp woman, the kind who remembered names and liked precision more than pleasantries. What can I do for you? She asked. I placed 3 envelopes on her desk. My name is Daniel, I said. This is a trust. This is a will. And this, I slid over the last one, is a plan. She opened the last one and raised an eyebrow. Interesting, she said. You're not trying to burn anything down. No, I said. I'm just making sure when it all does burn, my son's not anywhere near the fire. I didn't go home after the lawyer's office. Not right away. Instead, I drove to a small cafe on the edge of downtown. The kind of place that served burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls that tasted like somebody's grandmother still made them by hand. I sat by the window, pulled out my notebook, and wrote 3 names. James, Allison, Richard. 2 I still cared about. 1 I didn't. Then I flipped the page and wrote a 4th, Evelyn Talbot, Allison's mother. You see, Evelyn's name never showed up in the family drama. She smiled at parties, decorated for holidays, and drank white wine in silence. But I'd watched her closely, and I'd learned something important. Evelyn wasn't oblivious. She was exhausted. She'd spent 30 years smoothing Richard's rough edges so no one looked too close at what he really was. And she was starting to unravel, thread by thread. I finished my coffee, tore the page out, and headed home. Allison was sitting on the edge of our bed when I walked in, her arms wrapped around her knees like she was trying to fold herself into something smaller. I read the documents, she said without looking up. The amendment. The shell companies. And I asked, tossing my keys on the dresser. He said it was temporary, she whispered. He told me Mom wouldn't need the trust for years. That the cabin needed repairs or it'd lose value. Did you ask to see the paperwork? I said. Or did you just nod like always? She flinched. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid. I'm not. I said, my voice low. I'm talking to you like a woman who knows the truth now. So what are you going to do with it? She looked up then. And for a second, just a second, I saw the version of her I fell in love with. The one who painted her own Christmas cards and danced barefoot in the kitchen at 2 a.m. That version was still in there, but buried under layers of fear, pride, and Talbot brand conditioning. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what any of this means anymore. It means you've got a choice, I said. You can keep pretending you're part of something noble, or you can protect your son. She nodded, slowly. Later that night, I sent an email, just one, to Evelyn. The subject line was simple, you deserve to know. Attached were the trust amendments, the financial funneling, and a quiet note from me. Your husband stole your security, not just your money, but your dignity. He used your silence like a bank account. I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm offering you the truth. Do with it what he never let you do. Decide for yourself. No threats, no promises, just fire, delivered politely. 2 days later, Allison got a call from her mother. She took it on the back porch, thinking I wouldn't hear. But I heard enough. How long? Evelyn's voice was shaky through the speaker. Since the renovation, Allison replied. And you knew? No, she said quietly. Not until Danny showed me. There was a pause. Then Evelyn asked something I hadn't expected. Do you trust him? Yes, Allison said. More than I've trusted anyone in a long time. When she came back inside, she looked different. Less porcelain. More human. I think my mom's finally waking up, she said. Good, I replied. Because we're out of time. The next weekend was the family's annual spring brunch. The one where Richard paraded his kingdom on a silver tray. Smiles, deals, social climbing all dressed up like family tradition. I showed up in jeans and a black button-down. Not sloppy, deliberate. Richard saw me from across the lawn. Smiled like nothing had ever happened. Slapped me on the back like I was still the loyal son-in-law who laughed at his jokes. But when he turned, Evelyn was standing behind him, holding a folder. His smile slipped. She didn't say a word, just handed him the documents. The originals this time, not copies. And a letter, her own. He didn't read them in front of everyone. He wouldn't give us the satisfaction. but I saw the twitch in his jaw, the vein in his temple, the cracks finally reaching his foundation. And for the first time since I married into this mess, I saw fear in Richard Talbot's eyes. Brunch was in full swing. Waiters in white shirts passed around mimosas, and the lawn behind Richard's estate looked like a magazine spread. Croquet sets no one would touch, parasols no one needed, and people pretending they enjoyed goat cheese with their strawberries. I kept my distance. Watched. Richard stood near the gazebo, smiling like a politician in a crowd of donors. Evelyn had handed him the envelope 15 minutes earlier. He hadn't opened it yet. He couldn't, because somewhere deep down he already knew what it said. Allison stood beside me under the cherry blossom tree near the fence. Her hand brushed mine, tentative at first. "I didn't know it went that deep," she said. "I did," I replied. She exhaled. "I used to think he was just harsh, old-fashioned. But it's more than that." "It's rot," I said simply. She nodded, silent. Across the lawn, Evelyn stepped away from her husband. Not a dramatic exit, just a quiet shift in orbit. She walked toward us, heels crunching lightly in the grass. "I read every page," she said, stopping in front of me. "I figured you would." Her eyes searched mine. "How long have you been holding on to it?" "A while," I said. "But James changed the timeline." She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile women wear when the last piece of a painful puzzle clicks into place. "I used to think loyalty meant swallowing secrets," she said. "Now I realize it just meant letting myself drown." She looked at Allison. "I hope you're smarter than I was." Then she walked off. Not back to Richard, but toward the garden, where her sister was waiting, already holding a glass of wine. And then it happened. Richard opened the folder. I saw it in real time. His face. The flicker of disbelief. The quick scan. The widening of his eyes as he reached the end of Evelyn's letter. He looked up like someone had just knocked the air out of his lungs. Then he turned fast, eyes locking on me like a wolf that just spotted fire inside its den. He started walking. I didn't move. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear the enamel scream. "You think this makes you a man?" he hissed under his breath. "Digging up old dirt and parading it around like some backwoods hero?" "No," I said, voice low. "Being there when my son needs me? That makes me a man. Teaching him that power doesn't excuse cruelty? That makes me a father." His hands balled into fists. "You think this will scare me? You're a speck. I've crushed better men than you by accident." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not aiming to scare you. I'm aiming to outlast you." I leaned in just enough so he could hear what came next. "And I'm not alone anymore." His eyes narrowed. That's when Allison stepped forward. "Dad," she said. His head turned sharply. "Not now." "Yes, now," she said. "You told me once that family was everything. That blood was thicker than anything else." He straightened. "It is." "Then explain to me," she said, voice trembling but strong, "why the trust that was supposed to protect Mom ended up fixing your vanity project?" He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "No excuses. No speeches. Just answer that." He didn't. Because he couldn't. That silence? That was the crack I'd waited for. But the real twist? It didn't come from me. It came from an unexpected voice. James. He was standing a few feet behind us, holding something in his hands. A photo. Of him, Allison, and Richard. "I found this in your study, Grandpa," he said, walking forward. "Mom said it used to sit on your desk. But it's not there anymore." Richard stared at the photo like it was a mirror he didn't want to look into. "Why'd you take it down?" James asked, his voice small. "I didn't," Richard began, but the words fell apart. And James, in all his 9-year-old clarity, just nodded and said, "I thought maybe it was because I'm not really family." The lawn went quiet. Guests glanced over, pretending they weren't eavesdropping. But they heard. Everyone heard. And in that moment, that exact moment, Richard Talbot stopped being the man in control. He became the man who made a child feel invisible. And no inheritance, no trust fund, no reputation could undo that. After James asked that question, "Is it because I'm not really family?" you could have heard a pin drop on that pretentious stretch of Talbot grass. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the truth wasn't just uncomfortable, it was ugly. And once it's out in the air, truth doesn't go back in the box. It multiplies. Spreads. That's when the guests started whispering. A soft, rippling undercurrent. Not because of James's question, but because of the look on Richard Talbot's face. For the first time in his life, he looked like the outsider. Not me. Not my son. Him. And then Evelyn moved. She didn't make a scene. She didn't throw a drink. She just walked up, calm and deliberate, and took the photo from James's hand. "I'll put this somewhere it matters," she said gently. Then she looked at Richard and added, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, "You used to be better at pretending." That landed. The whispers turned into second glances. A few phones came out. Someone from the Post-Star Journal was there. Of course they were. Evelyn knew it. Maybe she even invited them. See, when the rich want to punish each other, they don't throw punches. They drop reputations like lead weights into public water. Richard tried to regain control. "Allison," he said, his voice strained, "get your son inside." Allison stepped forward. "My son," she said, eyes hard now, "has more integrity than most adults in this family. And he asked a question you still haven't answered." You could feel it. The dynamic shifted. Richard was no longer the patriarch. He was just a man surrounded by truths he couldn't bury fast enough. That's when I decided it was time. I pulled out the third folder. This one had been sitting in my glove box for weeks. Not because I was afraid to use it, but because timing matters more than power. Use it too early, it's drama. Use it when the wound is open, it's justice. I opened the folder, pulled out 3 documents. A deed transfer, a tax lien, and a black and white photo. Richard saw the photo and froze. Because it was him. And not the him he showed at charity events. Not the gray-haired mogul in tailored suits. It was younger Richard. Sweaty, wild-eyed, sitting across from a man named Peter Landon. A man who mysteriously lost his farm 30 years ago after failing to meet payments on a predatory loan. A man who ended up drinking himself to death in a halfway house after losing everything. A man whose grandson is now my attorney. I handed the documents to Evelyn, not Richard. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. She stared at it. Then her breath caught. "Oh my God," she said, voice trembling. "This was Peter. We used to go to their orchard every fall. He had a son, Kenny." "Yeah," I said. "And Kenny's son is the one helping me unwind everything Richard's been hiding. Turns out the cabin? It's sitting on land that was originally stolen through a false foreclosure claim." Evelyn's hand covered her mouth. "You married into this family," Richard snapped, voice cracking. "You think you can rewrite history with a few pieces of paper?" "No," I said. "But your daughter deserves to know the truth about the man who built her childhood around a lie." I turned to Allison. "You think your father built this empire from nothing?" "He didn't. He built it from someone else's ruin. He weaponized money, silence, and shame. And you let him because it was easier to believe he was just complicated." Allison stood there, shaking. Not from anger. From realization. From years of remembering things that finally made sense. She looked at her father, really looked at him, and whispered, "I don't think I ever really knew you." And that, right there, that was the hit Richard didn't recover from. Not the documents. Not the photo. Not even the public unraveling. It was his daughter pulling away with both hands and finally seeing the man he truly was. He turned, stormed back toward the house like a king retreating from his own battlefield. But his crown? It never made it through the front door. It was 2 days after the brunch when the knock came. Soft. Controlled. The kind of knock that doesn't ask for entry, it expects it. I opened the door to find Gerald Pierce standing on my porch. I knew the name. Everyone who's ever tangled with a wealthy man does. Gerald was the Talbot family lawyer. A shark in a cardigan. The type who could gut you with a smile and walk away without a wrinkle in his slacks. "Daniel," he said, extending a hand like we were old college friends. "Might I have a moment?" I stared at his hand. Didn't take it. I don't do conversations that start with folders unless I'm the one holding them. He chuckled, all charm and teeth. "Of course. May I come in?" "No." He blinked, not used to hearing that word. "Suit yourself," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "I'll keep it brief." He opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. Thick. Sealed. "This is a gesture from the Talbot family," he said. "A goodwill settlement of sorts. A financial arrangement to ensure the privacy of certain, unfortunate misunderstandings. I didn't touch it. You came to my house to buy my silence." "Not at all," he said smoothly. "We're simply hoping to avoid further discomfort for all parties involved. I'm sure you understand that some matters, especially those involving historical land disputes, are best resolved quietly, with dignity." I crossed my arms. Dignity died when Richard told my son he wasn't really family. Gerald gave a pained smile, the kind rich men wear at funerals where they never liked the deceased. Children misinterpret things all the time. "He didn't misinterpret a damn thing," I said coldly. "He handed that folder over because he knew what your client was." Gerald held the envelope out again. There's a number in here that could change things. For you. For your son. No strings, just discretion. I took it, looked him dead in the eye, and ripped it in half. Right there on the porch. He flinched. Just a little. I let the pieces fall between us like snowflakes made of blood money. You know what changes things for my son? I said, seeing his father stand up to a bully and not flinch. Gerald's smile faded. Very well, he said. I'll inform Mr. Talbot of your response. You do that. And tell him this, too. There are still 2 folders left. That made him pause. I didn't elaborate. Let his imagination do the rest. He left without another word, walking down my steps like a man headed for a car that suddenly didn't feel like enough armor. As the tail lights disappeared, Allison stepped onto the porch behind me. You really tore it up? She asked. Would have lit it on fire, but I don't want to scare the neighbors. She smiled. A real one this time. Not forced. Not uncertain. James was watching from the window, she said. Good. Because that moment, it wasn't about money. It was about memory. The kind that stays with a boy as he becomes a man. Later that night, I pulled out the 4th folder. I hadn't opened it in a while. It wasn't about Richard. It was about Allison. Stuff I'd started gathering long before any of this blew up. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I knew the Talbots didn't let anyone walk away clean. Text messages. Email traces. A bank account opened under her name tied to a consulting firm that didn't exist 2 years ago. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I was going to find out. Because there's one thing I've learned through all this. Betrayal doesn't always come in a scream. Sometimes it whispers. And the next chapter? It's about to get very quiet. That night, after James was asleep and the house had gone still, I brought out the folder. The one with Allison's name on it. I'd never meant to open it like this. Not after everything we'd survived together. Not after the way she stood by me at the brunch, shielding James with words I'd prayed she'd say for years. But something didn't sit right. There were things that didn't line up. A few strange deposits. An old email thread with her cousin in corporate real estate. A pattern of excuses for trips that never had receipts. And that consulting firm, Lacewood Strategies, LLC, registered under her maiden name. Quietly. Months before Richard's trust moved money into the renovation account for the cabin. I found the account's P.O. box listed under a co-working address across town. The same building where Richard's shell companies rented space. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, reading line after line, transaction after transaction. And I saw it. A $20,000 wire transfer to Lacewood, 3 days after Richard lost a key vote on the estate's investment fund. A vote Allison had weighed in on after being asked to sit in and observe. Not illegal, not on paper, but she was in it, up to her neck in quiet complicity. She hadn't just looked the other way. She'd helped reinforce the silence. I waited until morning. Then I confronted her. We were in the garage. She was packing boxes for some donation drive. I closed the door behind me. Allison, I said, we need to talk. She turned, surprised by my tone. I found the Lacewood account. She froze. And I saw it. Not guilt. Recognition. Like a part of her had always known this conversation was coming. You were never just watching from the sidelines, were you? Her shoulders fell. It wasn't like that, she said quietly. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Then what was it? I asked. Explain it to me like I'm your son asking why his mother's fingerprints are on the same ledger her father used to gut people. She swallowed hard. I started Lacewood as a side project, she said. Dad told me it was a way to learn, something to help me step into the family business without getting steamrolled. He said if I had my own entity, I'd have leverage. Protection. Protection from what? She looked at me. From you. I blinked. Excuse me. Her eyes were glassy. Not like that. Not because I thought you'd hurt me, but because I didn't think you'd stay. I stood there stunned. You thought I'd leave? I thought you'd realize the kind of family you married into and run. And once you knew how deep it went, once you saw who my father really was, I didn't think you'd look back. So you made a nest egg. I made a parachute, she whispered. And I believed her. That was the worst part. She wasn't lying now. She was telling the truth. Raw and pathetic and human. She had built a financial escape route. A way to walk away clean, without dragging James through the fire. She hadn't planned to use it, but it had been there. Quiet. Waiting. I was scared, she said. You were the only real thing in my life. And that terrified me more than my father ever could. I didn't speak. I just handed her the folder. She took it with shaking hands, flipping through the pages. seeing the evidence, the trail, her own cowardice in black and white. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. "I believe you," I said. And I did. But belief isn't the same as trust. Trust, once cracked, doesn't shatter. It calcifies. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I slept on the couch, next to the stairs. Not as punishment, but as distance. As clarity. I told James the first was just up early when he came down. But the truth? I wasn't up early. I never went to sleep. Because I was thinking about folder 5. The last one. And what's inside? It's not about Richard. Not about Allison. It's about me. I waited until James was at school. Until Allison left for her first solo therapy session, something she scheduled without me prompting. Maybe guilt. Maybe redemption. Time would tell. Then I sat at the kitchen table. Laid out folder 5. Unlabeled. Unshared. Untouched. And opened it. Inside, an old envelope, yellowed from years tucked away. A photograph. A background check. And a single sticky note in my own handwriting. If you ever start to believe you're the hero, read this first. I stared at the photo. Me, 10 years younger. No lines around my eyes. No ring on my finger. Arm slung around a woman named Claire Hartwell. She wasn't Allison. She was the woman I almost married. And the reason I almost didn't trust again. Claire had been the first person who made me think I could outgrow the past. That I could leave behind my father's bitterness, the trailer park silence, the bruises hidden under long sleeves and polite smiles. But Claire had her own demons. And I ignored every one of them. The gambling. The disappearing acts. The night I got a call from a debt collector looking for both of us, even though we had separate accounts. I'd been helping her. Paying things off. Believing every promise. Then one night I came home and found a note. "You're too good, and I'm too broken. Don't follow me." See? But I did follow her. All the way to a rundown hotel 2 counties over, where I found her drunk, screaming at the clerk because her card got declined. I didn't say a word. I just drove home, packed up her things, and erased her number. But I never really erased her. Because every time I started to trust someone after that, I checked the exits. I counted the lies. I read the room too well. So when Allison first told me she loved me, I made a backup copy of that moment in my mind, just in case she changed the script. And now, here we are. Claire Hartwell, a ghost I buried with silence. But the background check? That's what made me keep this file. Because a year ago, her name showed up again. Not on my phone. Not in a letter. But on a Talbot Holdings subsidiary expense report. Listed as a communications consultant. Paid under a name she used once in college, Clarissa Hale. It didn't make sense at the time. Why would Richard be paying my ex-fiancée? Unless someone hired her to look into me. To check my background. To find pressure points before I ever walked down the aisle. Suddenly, all those coincidences made sense. The job interview Richard arranged for me that felt too perfect. The way Allison always knew the right thing to say when I got quiet. Like she'd seen a cheat sheet. Maybe she had. I stared at the sticky note again. If you ever start to believe you're the hero. I wasn't the hero. I was the wild card. The one Richard couldn't pin down. So he tried to buy intel. And who better to sell it than the woman who already knew how to hurt me? Only problem? I don't break the same way twice. I picked up my phone. Dialed the last known number listed under Clarissa Hale's name from the background check. It rang. And someone picked up. "Hello," she said. And just like that, I was back in that hotel parking lot, staring at a woman who made lying sound like lullabies. "Claire," I said. "We need to talk. About Richard Talbot. And about me." "Claire." Silence. Then a sigh. "You found me. Didn't have to look far," I said. "You left your fingerprints on Talbot Holdings like a drunk burglar." Another pause. Then a bitter chuckle. "Guess I'm getting sloppy in my old age." "You were paid," I said, no question in my voice. "Richard Talbot." "What?" She exhaled. I could hear the tremor she tried to hide. "It wasn't like that." "No." I leaned back in my chair. "Because I have a contract summary, bank logs, and a phantom LLC registered 3 weeks before Allison introduced me to her father." Still silence. "I'm not calling to scream, Claire," I said finally. "I've done that part. I'm calling because I want the truth before I decide what comes next." That did it. Her voice dropped a notch. Professional. Flat. I was hired as an asset validation consultant. Meaning, background research, social engineering, financial risk assessments. Of me. Yes. I didn't say anything for a moment. The weight of that single word dropped like concrete in my gut. She went on. Your name came across a short list Richard's office kept. You were dating Allison. No pedigree, no institutional wealth. But your intelligence scores flagged something. Wait, what? He has a team. Psychological profiling. Academic footprints. They cross-check any man who gets near the Talbot daughters. You came back flagged as unpredictable, high risk, but potentially useful. I closed my eyes. Useful. Like a wrench or a pawn. What did you tell him? I asked. Not much, she said. Not at first. Just your history, upbringing, work ethic, patterns. But then he wanted more. Yes. Emotional triggers. Past trauma. Trust thresholds. I told him you were loyal to a fault, but would burn everything if betrayed. She hesitated. I also told him you'd never hit a woman. And that scared him more than if you had. Why? Because it meant you'd wait, she said softly. You'd play the long game. Make him bleed slow. She was right. And Richard had known it. Long before he ever shook my hand at Allison's birthday party and told me I was the kind of man America used to make before it got soft. He didn't respect me. He feared what I might become. I heard her shift on the other end of the line. Danny, I didn't come to him. He found me. I was broke, still living off the last of a mistake I made in Reno. He offered money, and I thought, what harm could it do? You were already with her, already gone, but you still took the money. Yes, she said, voice breaking. But I also shut it down after 6 months. Told him I wouldn't help him monitor you anymore. That if he wanted to spy on his daughter's husband, he could do it himself. Why? Because I saw the pictures. What pictures? The ones you never knew she took. Allison, you and James. At the lake. Reading on the porch. You weren't playing dad. You were a dad. And I realized I'd helped a monster run surveillance on a real man. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I still have the reports, she added. Emails. Voice memos. Even a recorded call where Richard told someone you'd never see it coming if he decided to cut you out. Send it, I said. You sure? Yeah. Because I'm done waiting. She hesitated one more time. You were the only good man I ever met, Danny. And I ran from you like fire. I'm sorry. I ended the call. Didn't say goodbye. Because this wasn't about closure. It was about ammunition. The next morning, I got an encrypted file in my inbox. Everything Claire promised. Documentation of Richard's manipulation. Proof of Allison's early knowledge. An entire web of deceit spun while I was still fumbling with flowers and first dates. And in the center, a memo. From Richard to Gerald Pierce, his lawyer. Should he ever become a threat, activate the fallback. Move Allison and James to the estate under guardianship. If he fights, expose the file. Below that, a folder name. Operation Orphan. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I stood up, walked to the garage, and opened the safe. Because now, it was time to show Richard Talbot that the man he tried to orphan didn't come here to beg. He came here to bury a legacy. I printed the memo. 1 page. Richard's words. His fallback plan. Move Allison and James to the estate under guardianship. If he fights, expose the file. A single sentence that carried the weight of every lie they ever told. The irony? The file he meant to use against me was nothing compared to what I'd uncovered about him. I didn't call. I didn't warn. I just drove. Black shirt, plain jeans, folder in the seat next to me like a co-pilot. The Talbot estate gates opened automatically when they saw my plates. Privilege has its perks, even when it's a Trojan horse. Richard was in the study when I walked in, glass of scotch in hand. A fire roaring even though it was 65 outside. His little show of power, always needing something to burn. Daniel, he said without looking up. Bold of you to come here after your little tantrum. I dropped the folder on his desk. He didn't flinch. Until he opened it. I watched his eyes move. Left to right. Word by word. Until they hit the phrase, Operation Orphan. His hand tightened around the glass. What is this? He asked, voice low. Insurance, I said. The kind that doesn't expire. You have no idea what you're playing with. I leaned in. No, Richard. You didn't. Because here's what the memo didn't know. I'd already made copies. Deposited them with my attorney. With Evelyn. With an investigative journalist who owed me a favor from a contractor expose I helped him verify last year. If anything happened to me, Richard's name would hit every front page in the state. Is this extortion? He asked. No, I said, calm. This is a restraining order in spirit. You come near James again physically, Legally, financially, I go public. You so much as whisper about guardianship again, and I make sure Operation Orphan becomes the headline that buries Talbot Holdings. He stood. You think this ends with a threat? No, I said. It ends with your silence. Forever. And if you can't manage that, I'll make sure you spend your final years explaining to donors, shareholders, and family court why you tried to seize custody of a child you called a stray. He opened his mouth. But I wasn't done. Oh, and before you think about playing the concerned grandfather act, don't bother. Evelyn already knows. So does Allison. And I've got Claire's testimony, documents, even her bank records. That got him. His face drained. Not from fear. From exposure. Because that was the one thing Richard Talbot never prepared for. Not a fight. Not a scandal. Shame. You won't get away with this, he hissed. I already did, I said, turning to leave. You had your chance to be a father. A grandfather. A man. Now you get to be a footnote. He didn't follow me. Didn't shout. Because for the first time in his life, Richard Talbot understood what it meant to be outmaneuvered. That night, I sat on the back porch with James. Stars overhead. A breeze running soft through the trees. Dad? He asked. Yeah, buddy. Am I really family? I looked at him. No hesitation. You're the only family that ever mattered. He smiled. Then asked the question I knew was coming. What about Mom? I exhaled. She's trying, I said. And trying counts. For now. Because this story? It's not over. Not yet. But for the first time, the ending is mine to write. 2 days after my meeting with Richard, Allison asked to meet somewhere neutral. She picked a park. The one we used to take James to before things got complicated. Before birthdays were divided into 2 families pretending they were one. She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived. Alone. No wine glass. No mask. Just her. Raw and tired. I sat down beside her. She didn't say anything at first. Just stared at the playground like she was watching ghosts of our old life run across the mulch. I read the memo, she said. Every word. Then you know why I did what I did. She nodded slowly. I should have said something sooner. About Lacewood. About Claire. About everything. Why didn't you? I was afraid if I peeled back the first layer, she whispered, I'd lose everything. My father. My family. You. You lost me anyway, I said, not cruel, just honest. She winced, then pulled a manila envelope out of her purse. I want to give you something, she said, handing it over. I opened it. Inside, termination documents for Lacewood Strategies LLC. A notarized closure. Signed. Witnessed. Filed. Done. This isn't just about Richard anymore, she said. It's about me. What I let myself become in his shadow. And what I let him do to you, to James. Her voice cracked. I kept telling myself I was trying to keep the peace. But really, I was just trying to stay comfortable. I looked at her. You don't get comfort when you let your son be collateral. I know, she said, her eyes wet. That's why I'm doing this. She handed me a second envelope. Inside, a journal. Her handwriting. Pages and pages. Entries dated back 5 years. Notes about James. About us. Her fears. Her guilt. Her love. And her slow realization that Richard wasn't just a tough father. He was a controlling narcissist who used love like a currency. I started writing when I first saw how he looked at James, she said. When he said he wasn't really part of the family. I told myself I'd speak up next time. But there was always a reason not to. And now, she looked at me. Steady. Now I want to be the woman you married. Not the one I turned into. I didn't say anything for a long time. Just held the journal. Flipped through a few pages. Saw something on page 17 that made me pause. Danny told James he was his legacy, not his burden. I cried in the bathroom after that. Because I don't think I've ever heard my father say something that kind. I looked at her. I believe you, I said. But belief isn't forgiveness. She nodded. I'm not asking for it. We sat there in silence, watching a kid who looked just like James swing too high and laugh too loud. Eventually, I asked, what happens now? She reached into her coat pocket. Handed me a key. To the house, she said. If you want to come back. Not because I asked, but because you choose to. I stared at the key. It didn't feel like a peace offering. It felt like a challenge. Does Richard know? I asked. Evelyn served him papers this morning, she said. Separation. Independent review of all financial assets. She's finally done covering for him. I almost smiled. Guess he never saw the women coming. No, she said softly. He never did. We stood. No dramatic goodbye. No promises. Just a woman trying to undo the damage. And a man who no longer needed her to save him. That night, I sat in James's room while he slept. The key on the nightstand. The journal beside it. And in my hand, a match. Because before this ends, I still have one more thing to burn. I didn't use the key. I knocked. Allison opened the door in sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt, the one I used to steal from her when we first moved in together. She looked surprised. Didn't think you'd knock. I didn't come back to move in, I said. I came back to take inventory. She stepped aside. The house smelled different. Lived in, but no longer staged. The fake floral air fresheners were gone. The Talbot family portraits had been taken down from the hallway. In their place, crayon drawings. James's. Small things, but telling. James is at school, she said. He doesn't know you're here. Good. I'm not here for a performance. I walked through the living room. The couch still had the throw pillows Evelyn gifted us. That was next on my list. She followed. I've been making changes, she said carefully. I can see that. You want coffee? No. I stood in the kitchen. Let the silence settle. You told me once, I said, that this house was your safe place. It was, she said. For a while. It wasn't for me. She looked down. Said nothing. I set the journal she'd given me on the counter. I read all of it. And there's truth in it, I said. But there's also self-preservation. You wrote about guilt like it was some kind of penance. But guilt doesn't fix what it broke. It just reminds you you're still holding the hammer. She blinked hard, tears threatening. I didn't know what else to do. That's the difference between us, I said. I did. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. Set it beside the journal. This is every document, recording, and trace of Richard's operation, including the surveillance plan, including the orphan memo. She looked confused. I thought you already used it. I used part of it, I said. This is the rest. And what do you want me to do with it? Decide who you are now, I said. If you want to bury your father's name, you'll need to burn more than just bank accounts. You'll need to burn his blueprint, everything he taught you about power, silence, and control. She reached for it, hesitated, then took it. I turned to leave, but at the door, I stopped. There's one more thing. She looked up. I want the house put in James's name. What? I want a legal trust drawn up. You and I can co-manage it. But I want the title transferred. Not for me. Not for us. For him. Why? She asked. Because every room in this house has a ghost in it, I said. And I want him to be the one who decides if they stay. Her lips parted. But she didn't argue. She just nodded. Okay. I opened the door. Tell him I stopped by. And tell him next time. I'll knock again. That night, I didn't go home. I didn't go back to the hotel either. I drove out to the cabin. The one Richard tried to control through fake loans and buried trusts. The one that, thanks to some very specific paperwork, was about to be sold, and the profits moved into a fund James would access when he turned 18. I stood on the porch, cracked a beer, and stared out at the lake. Richard Talbot built this place to be an altar. But in the end, it would be his graveyard. And I'd made sure my son would never have to bow it either. It was a week later when James came back from school carrying a shoebox. Dusty. Labeled in red marker, Lake House, private. He'd found it in the attic. Allison called me the moment she saw it. I was at my lawyer's office finalizing the trust on the house. James found something, she said. He wants to show you. I drove straight over. When I got there, James was sitting at the kitchen table. The box in front of him. Lid off. Contents spread out like a museum exhibit of regret. Old letters. A black and white photo. A watch. And a cassette tape labeled simply, "To My Legacy." He looked up at me. Did Grandpa leave this for me? He asked. I sat down across from him. Allison stood in the doorway, arms folded like she was afraid to breathe. Where'd you find it? I asked. In the attic. I was looking for my old snow boots. Did you listen to the tape? He shook his head. I wanted to wait for you. That moment, right there, that was the kind of trust you don't earn with blood. You earn it by not breaking when you had every reason to. I pulled an old tape player out from a drawer. Allison had one stored for vintage aesthetic, of course. We popped it in, and we listened. Richard's voice crackled through the speakers. Slower, more thoughtful than I'd ever heard it. If you're hearing this, it means I'm not around anymore. Or at least, I'm not in your life. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. That's not for me to say. James looked at me, confused. I made mistakes. Some I justified. Some I couldn't. But I always believed legacy meant power. Control. holding on to what was mine no matter the cost. But if you're my grandson and you're listening, I want you to know something. A pause. You don't owe anyone your silence. Not even me. Especially not me. Whatever they say about me, believe what you see, not what you're told. And if you ever wonder who you are. Another pause. You're not me. The tape stopped. That was it. No apology. No confession. Just a man who finally realized too late that power doesn't pass down, it poisons downward. James was quiet. He turned the photo in his hand. Richard is a boy, standing beside a stern-faced father who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Truman administration. "Dad," James said. "Yeah, buddy? Was Grandpa a bad person?" I closed my eyes for a second. "Open them." "He was a broken person," I said. "And he didn't try hard enough to fix what he broke." James nodded slowly. "Are you broken?" I didn't flinch. "Yeah," I said. "But I'm trying." He slid the watch across the table. "Then maybe you should keep this," he said. "Fix it. Make it yours." I looked down at the watch. It had stopped at 2:41, a time frozen in the past. But the boy who handed it to me? He wasn't frozen at all. He was becoming.